In 1131, a 34-year-old intellectual prodigy named ʿAyn al-Qudat was publicly executed by the Seljuk state in the Iranian city of Hamadan. He was an elite legal judge, a theologian trained in the orthodox Shafi'i and Ash'ari traditions, and a mathematician who studied in the academic lineage of Omar Khayyam. His downfall was engineered on two fronts. Publicly, the state issued a fatwa, a formal Islamic legal ruling, condemning him to death for theological heresy. Privately, the Seljuk government moved to silence his public castigations of their corrupt financial practices. The political regime wanted to eliminate a vocal critic, but the religious scholars who signed his death warrant were genuinely terrified of the ideas contained in his philosophical writings. Qudat's execution stands as the final logical consequence of a ruthless, mathematically precise logical system pushed to its absolute extreme. The specific charge of heresy that made his Persian writings so controversial was his defense of Iblis, the devil. Qudat did not view Iblis as the embodiment of evil. He argued that Satan is the archetype of the perfect, choiceless monotheist. This claim contradicts the conventional understanding of the fall of man, where Iblis is the proud, obstinate enemy of humanity who refused God's command to bow to Adam. This defense of the devil is not based on irrational mystical ecstasy. Qudat derived it using strict Avicennan modal logic, the rigorous philosophical study of necessity, possibility, and impossibility. To understand why the devil is the hero of Qudat's theology, we have to reverse engineer his worldview, starting by establishing the limits of human reason. Qudat begins with epistemology, the foundational philosophical problem of how we acquire knowledge. He starts by examining ilm, the standard discursive knowledge we use to navigate everyday life. As we see in this diagram, ilm requires a strict subject-object duality. It relies on the model developed by the philosopher Avicenna, where the intellect operates by categorizing the world into distinct genera, or groups, and specific differences. Qudat points out a flaw in this system. Ilm is an excellent tool for measuring the physical world, but it is incapable of grasping the infinite or the immaterial. Reason hits a hard limit. His solution is a higher mode of cognition. He calls this the stage beyond reason, or marifa, a term meaning deep, intuitive recognition. Marifa functions like Platonic recollection. The knower realizes that universal truths are not external objects to be observed, but are already inherent within the deepest, uncreated layers of their own soul. Qudat describes this transition as opening the eye of the heart. The boundary between the observer and the observed dissolves, and the knower universalizes their mode of existence to become the perceived. Once the boundary between the knower and the known is destroyed, the philosopher is forced to rethink the nature of what actually exists in the physical universe. This shift from how we know things to what actually exists moves us into ontology. Here, Qudat invokes Avicenna's Burhan al-Siddiqin, or the demonstration of the ever-truthful, a logical proof for the necessary existent. The baseline premise is that everything in the physical universe is contingent. A tree or a planet has a beginning, it changes over time, and it requires an external cause to exist. It cannot exist by virtue of itself. Avicenna deduced that an infinite chain of contingent things is impossible. The series must ultimately terminate in a singular entity that is self-caused, existing by its own eternal necessity. Qudat takes this proof and makes a radical leap. If God is the only entity that possesses necessary existence, then contingent beings do not actually possess true existence at all. Look at this visual representation of what Qudat calls his mirror metaphysics. The necessary existent is the only real object, casting its reflection onto the mirror of the cosmos. A form in a mirror only exists as long as the observer's gaze is fixed upon it. If that gaze shifts, the image vanishes entirely into relative nothingness. Because contingent reality is a fleeting reflection, Qudat argues there is no self in existence other than God. This plunges the entire cosmos into a state of absolute ontological oneness.
This creates a problem. If the universe is a singular expression of absolute oneness and God is pure light, where does evil come from? Qudat answers this by attacking Zoroastrian moral dualism, which posits a cosmic battle between independent forces of good and evil. He declares that essential evil lacks any existence in the cosmic architecture. Drawing again on Avicenna, he defines evil as a mere privation of light. It is an unreality, caused simply by distance from the ultimate source of existence. Qudat specifies a concept he calls relational evil, or nispati. Events are only designated as bad based on our localized interaction with them. Qudat uses a specific case study to illustrate this perspective gap between humans and God: the medical practice of cupping, drawing blood to treat illness. To a child undergoing the procedure, the pain of cupping is absolute evil.
But to the parent observing the procedure, the action is structurally good and necessary for the health of the system. If evil is an illusion caused by a limited perspective, then every action in the universe, even those that appear painful or destructive, is a deliberate expression of divine perfection. We now have a perfect universe where evil is an illusion. The next question is one of agency. Do we actually possess free will? The Mu'tazila, a rationalist theological school, argued for absolute libertarian free choice. Qudat explicitly rejects their position. He introduces a theory of compelled freedom. Humans make choices, but those choices are constrained by our inherent nature and by the cosmic secondary causes set in motion by the necessary existent. Notice how this piece of iron interacts with a magnetic field. Qudat uses this analogy to visualize how a purified human desire interacts with divine will. Unalloyed iron does not choose to fly to the magnet. When all contaminants are removed, its pure nature leaves it irresistibly compelled towards its source. True spiritual perfection is not about making morally good choices. It is about stripping away the ego entirely until you are choicelessly compelled towards God. Qudat taught these dense mathematical and logical concepts to his students using a pedagogical process called tamufful, or imaginalization. Tamufful is the unique imaginal space where the changeless world of pure meaning intersects with the physical world of changing forms. This process allowed Qudat to bypass discursive reason entirely, utilizing poetry and imagery to deliver technical philosophical payloads directly to his students' intuition. The primary imaginalized metaphor in his Persian writings is the story of the moth and the candle. Qudat describes the moth making an uncontrollable instinctual dive straight into the fire of the candle. It acts purely out of a state of compelled love. When the moth hits the flame, its mothhood is completely annihilated. Only the fire of love remains. This metaphor provides the necessary framework to understand Quwat's defense of the devil. The convergence of these philosophical threads reveals the internal logic of Quwat's most dangerous teaching, Tawhid Iblis, the absolute monotheism of the devil. The Quranic narrative establishes the setup. God commands the angels to bow down to his newest creation, Adam. Iblis point-blank refuses. Apply the epistemology rule. Iblis has attained marifa. He possesses no subject-object duality. He cannot see Adam as a separate entity worthy of worship. Apply the ontology rule. Iblis knows that only the necessary existent is real. To bow to a contingent mirror reflection like Adam would be an act of actual polytheism. Apply the action rule. Iblis is the unalloyed iron. His perfect, selfless love for God makes him a compelled lover. He has no choice but to refuse the order. This results in a tragic resolution. Iblis accepts the relational evil of God's curse, preferring eternal pain and blame over acknowledging a reality other than his beloved. For ʿAyn al-Qudat, the 72 sects of Orthodox religion are trapped arguing over the illusion of physical forms. True submission is the religion of love, an ontological destruction of the self, where the seeker, the sought, and the act of seeking become one.